Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you here with us today. We can imagine how insane your life has been these last few weeks, and we take great, we are very sensitive to what it is that you're dealing with, and the fact that you've chosen to spend this next hour with us is truly appreciated. My name is Luciana Cardarelli, and I'm Program and Member Services Coordinator from CPCO. And with me today, we have experts in the room who are here to learn with us, and I am here to learn from you. Christine Sertum, Barbara Nika, Deirdre Wilson, our French colleague Eric Genier are all part of a project that has been happening since, I guess, early summer. And we've spent time thinking and learning about grade 9 math, and specifically how this particular course has become a Destreamed program and what this means to us as leaders in schools. Having said all that, again, welcome. I hope you enjoy this next hour together. We know it will definitely be worth your while. I'd like to take a moment, please, to acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral territory of nations within nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, and the Michi-Sagig, the inherent right holders of this land, which is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I am grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on these lands in a community of sharing. As educators, we have a duty to learn, understand, and redress the historical and ongoing impacts of colonialism. We have a responsibility, individually and collectively, to reconcile our relationships with the land and peoples. And we'd encourage you to say hello from whatever land and territory you find yourself on. This, of course, represents where our CPCO and OPC offices reside. I know that from my perspective, especially after September 30th of this year and everything that has happened in Canada and in Ontario with respect to residential schools, I spent a lot of time thinking about my place as a newcomer to this land and how it is that I need to thank those peoples who have been here before us. Brad, I'll get you to move forward. Thank you.
And so our plan for today is we wanted to start by just reviewing our role in the implementation. And then we really want to talk about a particular resource the ministry has made available, which is called High Impact Instructional Practices in Math. And we're going to zero in today on 4 particular practices and discuss and share how we could support our teachers, our math teachers, in learning each of these practices. So we thought, just to kind of ground us and remind us where we are in our work, is this comes from the leadership framework, kind of the principles TPA document, and looking at some of those practices that are promoting collaboration is in that document. And so what we're talking about today is working with your teachers and supporting your teachers and building that collaborative culture at your school, and so that we can increase teacher capacity and increase student achievement and well-being. And so our discussion is going to be about how we improve teacher quality today. Oops. Yeah, there we go. And so this is the document we want to talk about today, supporting high quality instruction. And it's part of the website where the ministry document is, the curriculum site. And it will help teachers learn about and adopt those high quality instructional practices. In addition to highlighting the practices, it expands on lots of key instructional strategies. It covers factors like important math instruction, like a Destreamed classroom, and knowing the learner would be one of those practices, understanding curriculum, providing a safe environment, and using various forms of assessment. So it has a lot of information in the document. We'll be looking today at those instructional strategies. And on the next slide, you'll see these are all the ones that are listed in the book, and there's more information about each. And the 4 that are highlighted are where we're going to focus our attention.
So I'm going to begin by talking about direct instruction. And one thing I'd like to highlight is that this document is a very handy document, because for each of these instructional strategies, it provides 2 pages, and it's very handy for a busy principal, a busy teacher to kind of have a quick look at those 2 pages. So direct instruction is actually something we often don't really talk about. But we know that there are times when direct instruction is important. It's a very intentional form of instruction. It provides the opportunity to check for understanding, summarize student experience. But also, I often think about it as it's an opportunity. Sometimes we need just-in-time skill building. So in other words, sometimes a teacher recognizes as students are engaged in problem solving, okay, time out for a minute, because we need a little bit of focus time to actually be thinking about skill building, because I'm recognizing, just like a coach might, that there are particular skills we need to work through. And on the next slide, we actually talk about really what is it? Because I think sometimes people have a feeling that it really is just teacher talk. But direct instruction, it's really important that it involves questioning, that it still builds on student thinking and engages students. It might be the opportunity for a teacher to introduce models and representations, to verbalize thought processes or particular procedures, or to review particular concepts that the students have already seen. It's usually carefully planned. And as I mentioned, the students are engaged during this time. It is not just teacher talking. It is a bit of back and forth. So that the students are included in a direct instruction lesson, or a direct instruction might just be a component of a lesson, through the kinds of questions teachers ask and the way the teacher builds on the student thinking to have that direct instruction. On the next slide, I'll talk about what it isn't. So it is not just a teacher lecture. It is not a teacher standing at the room and just kind of talking, kind of what I think about the Charlie Brown teacher, wah, 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 where all the students hear is just teacher talk. No, it really is about that idea of engaging the students in direct instruction and building on their student thinking while they're going through that. When does it occur? Well, it occurs many times. It might be at the beginning of a unit or the beginning of a lesson when students are just learning about a new concept. It could be kind of in the midst of the lesson. As I say, I've talked about just-in-time skill building. The teacher might recognize that students need to work on something. Or it could be kind of closer towards the end of some student learning, when they're really deep in that learning process, when the teacher actually might need time to consolidate the student thinking and kind of pull some of those ideas together and actually kind of shape the direction and connect those different diverse ideas that have come up within that classroom, perhaps in a problem-solving opportunity.
Our next strategy we want to talk about is tools and representation. And tools could include concrete or virtual manipulatives, computer programs, regular or virtual calculators, dynamic geometry programs, websites, interactive problems, virtual games. There's sort of all kinds of things that this would encompass. And giving students manipulatives and access to online tools really helps students to explore problems and to test their ideas. They will also encourage different representations so that all students can build understanding. Most importantly, they allow insight into students' thinking, helping teachers to identify misconceptions and build on students' understanding. In the next slide, we talk about what it is and what it isn't. And so using tools and representations gives teachers and students a way to model situations concretely and pictorially. You know, they're not just toys for students to play with. Using tools and representations helps students to examine and to discover and to think about mathematical relationships. They're not a quick fix in that the student will pick up a manipulative and just automatically know the answer to the question, but rather they'll help students explore and make sense of the problem. Using tools like manipulatives often draws on students' spatial reasoning and helps all students to make connections. It's not just for our students who are struggling, it's for all students. It really helps to deepen understanding. The main purpose of using tools and representations is to create opportunity for talk, to talk about the math. They work best when students can work together and use tools and different representations to explore, to investigate, and to discuss different math concepts and share their thinking. Just some examples here to show you this is a particular expectation in the curriculum around understanding different shapes. And this is a construction that you would find at GeoGebra. And students can manipulate it by moving those red dots. And it's not live here on our screen, but there is a link that you could explore later when you get a copy of the slideshow. And they can see that as they move it, they can change the height of the triangle, they can change the width of the triangle, and they can calculate the areas and see how things are changing and discover relationships by playing around with this construction. So it helps to build that deeper understanding of the relationship between the objects. In the next one, we have an example that comes from a website that's called Which One Doesn't Belong? And in these images, on the right, the students are discussing and comparing slope, direction, y-intercept, and it could even talk about fractions. And there isn't one answer that's right. You could find lots of reasons or lots of ones that don't belong or different reasons that you could group them together. So it's nice that there's more than one answer and students can notice lots of similarities and differences and use that to explain their thinking. The image on the other side, as students can look at slope, direction, y-intercept again, and again, one solution doesn't necessarily it's not just one solution that doesn't belong. They can choose different things and make different cases and arguments. So these manipulatives, these tools, these websites can really help students to deepen their understanding and explain their thinking.
So the next practice is math conversations, and we'll start by explaining why we chose this particular one like the other ones. So when students engage in the meaningful math conversation with their peers, they have an opportunity to share their math strategies, their solutions and ideas, and also respond to other students' mathematical ideas. Also, they can discuss the errors, the mistakes they make, the misconception, and try to understand the rationale behind them. Let's say, is it an arithmetical error? Let's say 2 plus 2 equals 5, or a misconception, and discuss the ways how to address them. They also can discuss what math strategy or formula they picked for a particular problem, and if it worked or not, and why it worked and why it didn't work. So therefore, it benefits all students and deepen their understanding of the math concept. The goal of the Ontario Mathematics curriculum is to provide students with key skills, and there is a list of skills that are in Ontario Mathematics curriculum for grade 9 to 12. And I'm just going to mention a few of them. One of them says work collaboratively, independently, and collaboratively, or think critically and creatively. And the most important one that is listed there is communicate effectively. And none of them can be done and communication effectively if you actually do not engage into a meaningful mathematical conversation. So we all know that communication actually is one of the 4 categories listed on the achievement chart. KICA, we say it, right? The knowledge, understanding, thinking, application, and communication. And teachers are asked to assess and evaluate students for each of these categories. And so communication, which is the convey of meaning through various forms, in mathematics cannot be done without having, again, meaningful math conversations. And last but not least, communication is one of the mathematical processes among 7 that support effective learning mathematics, like the 7 problem solving, reasoning, improving, reflecting, connecting, communicating, representing, selecting tools, strategies, but all of them cannot be done without actually making sure and ensuring that students are engaging in meaningful math conversation. So what is it? Math conversation is more than just simply talking about math. Students can share their ideas, as we mentioned in the previous slide, and think and their thinking with their peers, a smaller group of students, or the whole class. And their peers actually can add to that conversation or respectfully disagree with it. So it can include a single or sequence of computation, calculations, Educators can use math conversation to make student thinking visible. They can do this by asking good questions that move student thinking forward, that provoke discussion and prompt specific concepts, skills, or representation. The teachers should give students open-ended questions that engage students, highlight key concepts, questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. And if you walk into a math classroom and you want to see if the meaningful math conversation is happening and what you're looking for, or how it looks for, or how it sounds like, you'll see students working collaboratively in a small group, participating and engaging in a discussion, sharing ideas, comparing solutions, strategies, conversing back and forth with about the problem with the teacher or another student. And they are reflecting, repeating, summarizing, rephrasing, translating, and building on thinking of others. You'll see teachers using students' ideas and errors and mistakes as learning tools and guiding students' responses, encouraging students to ask questions about another student's response. So you'll see teachers support student thinking and engage them in deep thought. So what it isn't, as previously was mentioned, any occasional conversation between the teacher and student, or the teacher and a group of students. It's not a math conversation. It's not seat work where students are doing practice questions, even when they are practicing a rote procedure to solve problems of a specific type. And it's not a one-way conversation where teachers are explaining a mathematical procedure to students instead of staying in front of a class, or even to a group of students, or even with the student. And teachers provide instruction to the class about an activity. Students ask a question about an assignment. Let's say, what is the deadline, and etc. So when it happens, as students are beginning to learn about the concept, effective and meaningful math conversation should be used to gather information about students' current level of understanding and knowledge, to activate prior knowledge and connect the current tasks to previous learning. And then student now in the middle of the learning, a student progress, and then effective and meaningful conversation should be used to make math explicit, to probe student thinking and require explanation, and reveal understanding and misconceptions. When students are deep in their learning, an effective and meaningful math conversation should be used to support connections between concepts and other math content areas, require justifications or explanations, and promote metacognition, or thinking about students' own thinking.
So I'm going to talk about problem-solving tasks and experiences. And just a reminder that the reason that we're talking about many of these things is because as administrators, a lot of time you want to think about, so what should I be seeing in a grade 9 Destreamed classroom? What are some of those instructional practices as I walk by? What might a conversation look like? What kinds of tools would students be using? And also part of what we want to consider in this PLN is how can we support teachers in using some of those practices. So problem-solving tasks tend to bring together some of the things we actually have talked about. One thing to know is that problem solving is not just word problems that we see at the end of a chapter in a textbook. It is so much more than that. In this particular case, we really are talking about what I would call rich tasks, or sometimes I've referred to them, or many have, as low floor, high ceiling tasks, because they have multiple entry points. So every student can step into this task at a certain place, and they allow for a variety of different solutions. So they're accessible to all students at various stages of readiness. They give more students an opportunity to construct mathematical ideas. Really what we're talking about is equity, and we want to be sure that all students have these opportunities to engage in these kinds of tasks, and using tasks with a multiple entry point really allows for that. It allows for students to reason, communicate, represent, and connect, as well as to justify their thinking, and all students should be having that opportunity in a grade 9 Destreamed class. They also can be used. A problem doesn't have to come at the end of the unit. So often people think I need to build the skills and then I'll give them the problem. I find quite often if we begin with a problem solving task or a rich task, out of that emerges time to introduce new concepts, build on that prior knowledge, and incorporate the students' ideas, and obviously consolidate that learning. On the next slide, we have a sample of a possible task. So this is a problem that I would say has multiple entry points. I know it because I've used it from grade 6 to grade 11. With students, I've used it with parents, I've used it with principals. And it's the painted cube. So first of all, this brings up the idea that I certainly would need a tool. I can't attempt this problem without building that cube out of those linking cubes. So I would need those tools. I also would need to work with other people to see what their thinking is and gather ideas from other people. So it brings up that need to have math conversations. So, and sometimes it might bring up the need for direct instruction. In other words, the teacher might need to do a timeout and let's look together at this idea. And maybe we need to kind of deconstruct some misconceptions or review some particular things. So this is an interesting task where the cube is dipped into paint and we have to decide how many cubes would have one face painted, 2, 3, etc. We're not doing the task tonight because this task is the kind of task, as in any rich task, that would require quite a bit of time. I wouldn't expect people to engage in this and solve this immediately. So, and I'm not assigning it for homework either, but it certainly is something that you could engage in. But as I say, I've used this at a variety of different grade levels, so I know it has multiple entry points, and people go to different places with that problem, depending on where they are in particular. On the next slide, I remind us that actually facilitating problem solving can be very challenging for teachers because it's not prescriptive. It's very difficult to prescribe exactly how a lesson with a problem solving task will go, as the teacher actually needs to be open to the mathematical ideas to emerge. So we need to give them like space to be able to explore doing that. They need to notice the ideas that emerge. They need to respond accordingly with prompts and probes and student thinking as they're working together. And my research that I've done in classrooms really indicates that when teachers work together to test out different kinds of problems in different classes and kind of come back as a group of teachers to share what kinds of ideas emerged, it really helps them in future to facilitate the task or to think about how will we consolidate student learning. One resource that I actually use quite often is called the 5 Practices for Orchestrating Mathematical Discussions. And I use that with teachers because it helps to give me a bit of a process as to the steps I would go through as a teacher in thinking about using these kinds of rich tasks. And part of that, and I'm taking a quote right out of that high impact instructional practices, part of that is that educators need to anticipate what might emerge, which is actually one of those 5 practices in that particular resource I just named, because then they're better able to build on the students' thinking, select student samples, and help to connect those mathematical ideas. Next slide. So really, problem-solving tasks really provide a space to facilitate a focused math discussions when students have completed this task, but they also allow for diverse strategies and thinking to be brought forward. And sometimes a teacher needs to go into a problem-solving task with an open mind. That, and I often suggest an open learning goal, because students will solve this in diverse ways and we need to respect those. So I always think about students need a risk-free space to try out the different mathematical ideas and develop their understanding, but we as administrators need to also recognize that the teachers need a risk-free space to work on their pedagogical practice. and to further develop these high impact strategies. So we need to be thinking about what are ways that we can support some of that, because some of this facilitation can be a challenge. So now I'll hand it back, I believe, to Barbara.
Initially, we thought actually to have breakout rooms, 3 breakout rooms to discuss and for you to choose actually to attend one of the breakout rooms with one of the high impact strategies that you want to explore further. But before we started, it was decided that we all can be in the same room and try to have the discussion about any of the high impact strategies that were mentioned here, any one of the 4. So you heard all the description, a little review that the 3 of us went over. And we have included some of the guiding questions for discussion. Let's say the first question is if you have seen this such strategy in practice, and can you share with us and with the group and with each other? And and how have you supported the teacher at your school to learn this practice, if that has been such a practice in your school? And how would you move to support your teachers in the future to learn this practice? So we'll open the floor now for discussion. And
really just wanted to know if you found our conversation today useful, maybe something that you learned today and something that you would like to learn next time, because we do have more PLNs coming up, and we want to make sure that the focus and the conversation is related to something you want to learn about. So we really would appreciate your feedback, not to stop the conversation, but just wanted to make sure I got that survey out before people were finished.
Thank you for that, Deirdre. And just to let people know, the second PLN will be on November 10th. So just about 3 weeks away or so. And the intention here is to serve your needs. We're so grateful for the conversation you brought to the table today, because again, we're here to serve you. Also, you may find on your association website a recording of a webinar that was held through August and September that kind of gives an overview on the changes to grade 9 math, and specifically our role as leaders in leading a Destreamed program, which we know will spread across secondary school education in Ontario. The conversation today has been rich and honest, and that's very much appreciated. Again, I'd like to give final word to our presenters if there's anything else you'd like to put forward at all.
I think the sharing is great. So thanks everybody for sharing, because I think that we need to learn from one another and see what works and what challenges we have, and we share.
Absolutely, learning with and learning from one another. Great, great professional development, no question about it.
And sharing all the links is great. Everybody's sharing in the chat window. That really helps.
Michael, I see you're asking about when today's recording will be shared. Brad, I know you're in the background. I'm thinking that perhaps in the next few days, we'll get materials out via email, and we'll have to look at how all of this pieces together in terms of editing it to get posted on each association's website. Regardless of your membership, if you do a search under professional learning, you'll find, and just type math, grade 9 math, you'll be led to the page within your association website that has last year's materials as well as this year's. And what's most valuable, again, is that we come together as a community of learners, because that is the fuel for all of this work. I would like to take a moment and thank Christine and Deirdre and Barbara. They have been working so hard since summer in preparing for these opportunities. They have been so generous and so humble in their expertise and in their knowledge, and set the platform for today's opportunity to become a reality. I wish each of you well. Life is a little bit busier than what we would like. There is no question. Take care of yourselves and take care of your colleagues, because together we will get through all of this. It's really heartening to hear that there's so much success happening in the field, as well as questions. And when we share those questions, we find pathways that help us lead to future successes and feed those areas of growth that not just our kids have, but that our teachers and that our leader colleagues also have. Having said that, I want to give you the next 4 minutes just for yourselves because we're finishing 4 minutes early. Again, take good care, enjoy your evening, and we hope to see you back in November. Good night, everyone.